Welcome to Your Financial Advocate with Greg DuPont from DuPont Wealth Solutions. As a practicing advisor and attorney, Greg teaches pre-retirees how to reduce debt and taxes and save with less risk so they have more spendable income and plan their way to a better life. Join us for this journey where Greg draws on years of experience and guest experts to help listeners achieve more spendable income for retirement.
Hello and welcome to Your Financial Advocate with Greg DuPont of DuPont Wealth Solutions. Greg, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Eric. I am doing fantastic.
You should be. This is your first guest on a podcast.
Yeah, I think it's time for us to open up the world and start bringing different messages out. So I did decide that I would invite someone to share what I believe is a very important message for our audience to listen to. So we're going to pour ourselves a little drink here, virtually, of course, and chat with Braden Blumenstiel, who happens to be my law partner, and he is got a little different charge in his world than I do. He gets to sue people. I like to say that.
Nice.
Yeah, he gets his pleasure out of suing people. I get my pleasure out of soothing people, and together we kind of are the yin and yang of things. But the reason Braden's on today for us, Eric, to have that virtual drink, the mission of this podcast is to provide people information so that their money supports their life in the way that they want to live it. But this is almost a public service announcement today, because one of Braden's his areas that he focuses on, that is really one that's not known by many people, is he pursues remedies for people that have been injured in the administration of a vaccine.
Wow.
And so I think it's very important for people to understand that this remedy is potentially out there. Now, Braden and I both avoid the politics of vaccines. It is something that's very charged, but there are some facts and some realities that people need to understand, and I think that Braden's messaging might be helpful to some people that are concerned about whether or not they should get the COVID vaccination, which is now becoming more available. So that's why Braden's on here today. And with that, Eric, I'd like to introduce you to my partner, who I'm proud to call my partner, Braden Blumenstiel.
Braden, thank you so much for being on the show. I did not know that there was a specialized section. I mean, I should have probably known that, but for vaccinations, that's so interesting to me.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, it's not a whole lot of people know about it. I'd like to first just say I am honored. I did not know I was the first guest on this. So thank you, Greg, for inviting me on. I appreciate that. Honored to be on. This is my first podcast, so I guess there's a lot of firsts going on right now.
All right.
So, yeah, with regard to the Vaccine Act, it's actually Congress passed the Vaccine Act in 1986. Basically saw that, unfortunately, although vaccines can do a lot of good for a lot of people, which they do, there are people that can have an adverse reaction to vaccines. And unfortunately, there are some people, although rare, that can have their lives and their families' lives altered so significantly, their entire life changes. And my background has been in personal injury. I have spent my entire career trying to help those that have unfortunately had something bad happen to them, and try to use the law to seek compensation for them, to do what I can with my legal education to help people the best way I can. The Vaccine Act is just one other avenue that I try to pursue to help people in such circumstances.
Braden, as we walk into this conversation, I think it'd be important for people to understand, what is a vaccine injury that is actually one that is part of the compensation plan that you just spoke of. I just had my second vaccine shot. I've been fortunate enough to have gotten both of them now. And, I had fevers and aches, and I know a lot of my friends that got it as well would have different varying levels of illness, a couple days of being sick for some people, or vaccine shot in, their arms sore for a little while. What is the type of injury injury that rises to the level that somebody should come and seek some guidance as to whether or not they are entitled to compensation under this program?
Okay, that's a good question. And there's basically just one major guideline is, and I'll get into more details that fall in line after this major guideline, which is, do you believe that you've been injured as a result of a vaccination that you received? That is the core question that the court is going to want to know. And that's basically when we file a petition on behalf of a client. That is our obligation to prove that the vaccine did in fact cause the injuries we allege were the result of that vaccination. There's more details. It gets a little bit more complicated than just that, but that's the core issue at every case that we handle. Can we prove that the vaccination caused the injury? I can give more details on what the court looks for if you guys think that would be worthwhile to the audience.
Well, what are the types of injuries that the court looks for and says, okay, so this is caused by the vaccine, and this is something that you should be compensated for? Is it I threw up for 3 days, or does it need to be more grueling than that?
Actually, you hit on a rather important point. One of the things, because it is not unusual that people will have some sort of symptomatology after receiving a vaccination, whether it's just a sore arm due to the needle or something more significant like nausea. Those are all things that are common with vaccinations. You do not get compensation for those more typical types of symptoms following a vaccination. One of the things the court requires is that the symptomatology, whatever it is, lasts for 6 months or more following the vaccination. So you can have, now there are exceptions if someone has anaphylactic shock and they die shortly after the administration of the vaccine. That's different, but absent death, essentially what ends up happening is you have to show that your symptoms lasted more than 6 months, or else you cannot get compensation under the Vaccine Act. Furthermore, the court actually has this thing called table injury. And this is based on the fact that they've seen certain vaccines can cause certain ailments or medical injuries, and they've seen it enough that if one of our clients has a petition that's filed in which they can show that a vaccine that qualifies under the table caused an injury that is also considered a on-table injury, and the first onset of symptoms occurred within this allotted time that the court has said it qualifies, then you can have a presumption that the vaccine caused the injury. And I can make it a little bit more concrete by using an example. People get the flu shot all the time, and most people are fine with it. But every once in a while, people will have an adverse reaction. The type of adverse reaction can vary considerably, but there's one that if you have a flu shot and you get this syndrome called Guillain-Barré syndrome, if you have that, if you're diagnosed with that, and you have an onset of symptoms between 3 and 42 days post-vaccination from the flu vaccine, then there is a presumption, the court will presume that the vaccine is what caused the Guillain-Barré, and then you can get compensation for that injury. With that presumption, it's a very powerful presumption because you'll get compensation unless the opposing counsel on the case can point to something else as more probable as causing the Guillain-Barré syndrome than the flu. So if you get it's called an on-table injury, and if you qualify for that, then there will be a presumption that your injury deserves compensation. And then we would just move into how much compensation is warranted. Most cases are considered an off-table injury. And what by that I mean, it's a vaccine that we allege caused an injury of some sort, an adverse reaction to the vaccine. But it hasn't occurred frequently enough that the court just presumes that the vaccine caused that injury. Therefore, we have to go through more of a process in order to demonstrate to the court that, in fact, the vaccine was the cause of our client's injury. Those get a lot more detailed, a lot more complex than an on-table injury, but that's basically how the two types of claims get broken down, on-table versus off-table. Both require 6 months of symptoms before you can seek compensation.
Did you get all that, Eric?
I did. And my only clarifying question on that is, you said 6 months of symptoms. So 2 examples. if you get a vaccine and there's neurological damage, that may not just be a symptom, right? I know they can
Correct.
try to treat neurological, or your arm falls off, right? I mean, that's pretty obvious. That's not growing back in 6 months, or we're not going to wait, right?
Right.
Would those be? It would just be a matter of proving that the vaccine did the neurological damage, and it would be accelerated, I would assume.
Yes. If you get like a permanent injury, obviously then, that allows me to say, well, it's a permanent, so the symptoms lasted. But yeah, if there's neurological damage, which we do see in many of our claims, that would also be deemed compensable as long as we can demonstrate that the vaccine caused that and it wasn't caused by something else.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're not seeing a whole lot of arms just falling off, so that would be a good thing. So
arms falling off, yeah, that's I don't know if I've come across that one. I have seen that people can get, and I guess that brings up another type of injury that just came to mind. There are injuries that are caused by the vaccine, enters the body, interacts with the central nervous system, causes various ailments that result in medical injury. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's not the vaccine itself, it's the needle. So you get the shot, and unfortunately the shot hits a nerve, and you can get frozen shoulder syndrome or things of that nature. People can get, they can have a lot of problems, but it's due to the needle. So it doesn't really technically have anything to do with the vaccine. It's just that the needle, I guess to use the phrase, hit a nerve or something else and cause damage. Yeah. But you can get compensation for that, even though it's not technically the vaccine.
So how does a claim get started then?
Well, most people are going to be familiar with kind of a complaint, a plaintiff, and a defendant. And the system works similar to that, except the names are a little bit different. Instead of a complaint, it's called a petition. Instead of the plaintiff, it's called a petitioner. And instead of defendant, it's called the respondent. So that's basically the parties that get involved in these things.
All right.
With regard to the Vaccine Act, what ends up happening is for our clients, I will file the petition, which is like the complaint, but I file it up in the Federal Court of Claims in Washington, D.C. In that petition, I will put together the factual allegations of my client that basically just setting forth the case on why we believe that the vaccine caused the injuries. Then we'll ask for compensation. So in terms of getting something started, it's as simple as contacting an attorney, gathering the relevant evidence, usually medical records, putting the petition together, getting it filed up in the Federal Court of Claims in Washington, D.C., and then you supplement the record with all the associated documents that you believe prove your client's claim.
So Braden, what's that process look like for the average petitioner once something is filed in Washington, D.C.?
Well, after they've gotten through the process of retaining an attorney and talking to the attorney and giving that attorney all the information that they need, and we get the documents filed with the court, we get a chance to supplement the record. Basically, what's nice is that we get to craft our argument and give all the supporting documents that we think are necessary to prove our client's claim. And so we will file the petition initially, but then if there's additional documents, whether it's additional medical records, whether it's affidavits from witnesses that we think can give supporting evidence to support our client's claim, we get a chance to put that all onto the record. And the respondent, like the defense attorney, holds off looking at our evidence and looking at our petition until we tell them that we believe we've supplied everything necessary for them to review the complaint and make a determination whether they are going to agree that compensation is warranted or whether they're going to fight our claim. So normally you file the petition, we get the medical records and all the other supporting documents filed. Then there's going to be a lull of a few months while the respondent, the attorney for the respondent, gets to look over what we submitted, and then they will decide whether or not they're going to fight the claim or whether they're going to say, yep, we agree, the vaccine caused the injury. Let's now move into settlement discussions and looking at the appropriate amount of compensation for the petitioner.
Now, you're saying that this is filed in Washington, D.C. I don't know exactly how the court system works, especially in Washington, D.C., and I don't care to. But my question is, does the petitioner or your client, do they have to go to court?
Typically, the vast majority of the time, they're never going to have to see the inside of a courtroom or anything like that. What's great about this is that everything is done electronically. So I don't even have to go up to Washington, D.C. Sometimes I may have to, but it's rare. For our clients, No, I mean, their actual like level of involvement in this process will be communicating with us, helping us gather the information that they need, and that's basically it. We'll take care of the rest. Now, we may bug the client for more information when necessary so we can do the best job we can to support the claim. But they aren't good. It's very rare for them to have to talk to the court, testify, things like that. So really, that's one of the good things about this program is we know that our clients are suffering. And I think the court realizes that as well. And so we try to make it as least intrusive as possible on our clients and, even the medical providers, their doctors and stuff. We try to leave them alone as well and try to prove the case without having to intrude on people's lives and make them sit through a bunch of depositions and go to court.
Nice.
So, Braden, as a reformed trial attorney myself, I know a lot of people don't like to have that deposition experience where they have to come into some type of conference room and get grilled by the other counsel. Does that happen in a vaccine claim case?
Well, you use the term grilled, and I would say that getting grilled by opposing counsel, no. What it is, and the good thing about this is it's an adversarial system. So it's not that we could just submit something and they agree with us every time and give us a bunch of money. We have to prove our claim, and so the attorney for a respondent will, look it over and say, well, we think that this is a weakness of the case or whatever. They're going to challenge it. But the good thing about it is that the vast majority of the time, we can have the entire case basically pushed through and decided without our client having to sit for a deposition. And that makes it rare because in the personal injury world, other areas that I've practiced, typically my client would have to sit for a deposition and answer the opposing counsel's questions. It does happen in this case, in this type of case. Vaccine acts, they do have depositions, but it's a lot more uncommon. And when they occur, my clients I've seen are treated well. And because regardless of the cause, whether the respondent disagrees with whether the vaccine caused it, they realize that they're dealing with people that have had a really difficult incident occur in their life that's affected their entire life, in their family's life. And so it's not like what you see on TV where the opposing counsel is trying to badger the person. They'll ask questions and my client will answer them, but it's not being grilled. And it's rare.
Are they doing that by Zoom and things like that? So can they do it in the comfort of their own home or?
Yeah. Now, sometimes you might have to come into my office, but we have clients that are all over the nation. And so we have people down in North Carolina. We have people all throughout the United States. And the great thing about technology is that if we need to have them deposed, we can find a location for them, whether it's a court reporter's office or if with the advancement in technology, more often our clients can just do it from their own home. And we can do these things via Zoom.
I love that because like you said a moment ago, these people are suffering. Right? Nobody wants to sue somebody else to get money because, they're injured. The bottom line is they're injured. They're suffering. There's something going on there. So that's great that they're able to do it remotely. And I like the fact that you even said the court recognizes, that these people are suffering. Yeah. So that leads me to my next question. How long does it take to resolve a claim? Because not only are they suffering physically, most likely, I'm assuming the majority of the time it's impacted their work as well. So now they're suffering financially. So how long does it take?
Doubt. It affects, it can affect every aspect of their life. And unfortunately, these are complicated, very medically complicated cases. You have to look at the microscopic level of how like a vaccine can interact with the central nervous system and do things of that nature and figure out medically how it is that the vaccine could have caused the injuries that we allege. And therefore, it takes a lot. Unfortunately, it does take time. Sometimes it can take a year, 2 years, 3 years or more. What we do is we try our best to put together our best argument as quick as possible with as much support as we can to try to help the court system come to a quicker resolution. But unfortunately, the reality is that they have 8 special masters, which is like a judge, but 8 of them to review thousands upon thousands of these petitions every year. And so they're backlogged. And, regrettably, it does take some time. But we do our best to push this through because we recognize what an impact this can have, not only on the person who suffered the adverse reaction and injury, but their entire family. Very often it affects everyone.
Yeah.
So Braden, since the mission of this podcast is to help people make smart decisions with their money, and so that their money will support their lifestyle, I'd hate to add insult to injury. What type of expenses would an injured person face? They have to pay thousands of dollars of legal fees, medical expenses. What's that look like?
Well, in terms of medically, they will be responsible for paying their own medical bills while this process goes on, because that's considered outside of the petition, outside of the legal channel that we would be pursuing for them. But hopefully they have medical insurance or things of that nature. If not, those are things that we can try to find resources for them. But in terms of pursuing a claim with the Federal Court of Claims, one of the unique aspects of pursuing these types of claims is that they will not be responsible for putting up money for expenses in advance. Now, that happens with personal injury quite a bit, but with the court, the court realizes, I believe, that these people obviously have had their life altered, and it's affected so many aspects of their existence that they are trying to do things to help ease the burden somewhat. And one of the things that they do is, as long as we have a good faith, reasonable basis for a claim, the court will actually pay for the expenses. Now, our firm advances the money for the expenses, but when we get the case settled or resolved one way or another, as long as we have a reasonable good faith basis for the claim, the court will reimburse those expenses. So really, people don't have to pay expenses on these things. It's a very, very, very rare exception that they would have to pay any money to pursue a claim like this.
So, wow. I mean, I did not expect that answer at all, that the court itself will.
It's unusual.
Yeah, that's yay government. Did something right.
Well, it's one of those times. Now, I don't want to go talk too much about it, but it is one of those times that I think they're doing the right thing.
Oh, that's great. So let me ask you this. I know that the process takes quite some time, but how soon should somebody reach out to you or an attorney if they feel they've sustained some sort of compensatable injury? I'm assuming there would be a length of time for proving things and all that jazz. So what's your best shot on that?
Well, to anyone who thinks that they've suffered a vaccine-related injury, I would say get on the phone and call someone, today. And it's being somewhat facetious, but honestly, one of the difficult things, one of the hard parts about pursuing these claims for me is that there's deadlines that are really, really strict, more strict than in other areas of law. And they can be as short as 2 years from the date of first onset of symptoms. And so I, as a rule, just say, if we have a client that's been injured by a vaccine, we got to get that petition filed within 2 years of the date of vaccination. It can be up to 3 years, but as a safe rule, we try to do it by 2 years. So therefore, if someone feels that they've been injured by a vaccine, I would call an attorney, an experienced attorney, as soon as possible, because delaying it can result in you missing the deadline. And if you miss the deadline, you don't get any chance for compensation. And that's one of the tough things about these types of cases is, there's these hard deadlines and they don't really budge. So if someone feels like they may have suffered a vaccine-related injury, you should call an attorney. You should have an initial consult, should be free. So just call someone who's got experience in this just to see what your rights are and whether or not you have a viable claim.
Eric, I'd like to add at this point that Braden is on a mission with this particular area of the law. As you reflected, it's unusual that the government would do something like they have in terms of providing a medium for legal representation, which essentially is being paid for by the government, and that's because there is a strong, obviously, public policy basis to promote vaccines and recognition that even if a very small percentage of people do get injured by the vaccine process, they are entitled to compensation. So one of the tools that Braden has put together is he's cultivated some resources and he's put them at a website called www.vaccineactlawyers.com, where, amongst other things, there's access to a consumer guide that he has prepared that kind of highlights some of the things that we talked about here today. He's also cultivated a Facebook support page for people that have been injured by vaccine, and there are in excess of 1,000 people that are members of that group, and it's at facebook.com/groups/vaccine victims. It is a moderated and curated site, so we try to keep the conversation civil on there. And also in the show notes, we're going to put a couple of federal resources that are out there for people. One is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, and the other is the National Vaccine Information System. Bunch of letters in there, so I'm not going to try to spell those out, but they will be in the show notes here.
Yeah, absolutely. Braden, what a wealth of information you are. I could see why Greg appreciates you and likes working with you so much. Thank you so much for being on the show, and congrats for being the very first guest.
Hey, honestly, this is great. I appreciate you guys, bringing me on and helping me through this. As I said, it's my first podcast. Hopefully it went fairly well.
I think it went great. Greg, any closing thoughts from you today?
So again, folks, the mission of this podcast is to help you live your life in the way that you want to live it. And we do not want to get into the politics of vaccines, but you do need to understand that there are some people that do get injured by this. And there's good to know that there are resources out there to get compensation. So don't let the fear of injury keep you away from getting vaccinated against COVID. We got to do it to get our economy back in running.
Yeah, absolutely. Gentlemen, one more time, I want to thank you for being on the show, and Greg for obviously hosting this show. And of course, our last thank you goes to you, listening audience. Thank you for tuning in and listening to Your Financial Advocate with Greg DuPont. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Greg comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks so much for listening today. For everyone at DuPont Wealth Solutions, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Your Financial Advocate. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of DuPont Wealth Solutions. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.